Hello, I'm your host Jim McLean. Welcome to the latest episode of the Banterflix Movie Review Show here on NVTV. Let's see what movies we'll be looking at tonight. We'll be reviewing Firestarter, which is out in cinemas now. Our pick of the streams is Everything or Nothing, which is currently available on Amazon Prime. And our DVD of the week is Dog. So that's what we've lined up for you this week, and joining me here in the NVTV studio tonight is local blogger and film critic Hamish Calvert.
Hi Jim.
Hamish, how have you been keeping this week?
Yes, all good. What about you?
I'm good too, Hamish. I'm excited about talking about movies. As always, why else would I be here? We have a couple of films we're going to be talking about. Before we do that, let's talk about some movie news. Right, Hamish. Let's kick things off. What's caught your attention this week in the world of cinema?
Well, there was a new teaser trailer has dropped, and I have to say I don't usually watch trailers, but I thought because it's a teaser, I'll give it a go. And it's actually for the new Predator movie. It's called Prey, and it's really caught my attention because it seems very different to anything the franchise has done before. It's a franchise that hasn't been doing so well recently. But this seems a bit more interesting. There's not much given away in the trailer, but it looks like it's set quite far in the past, and you don't even see a predator in the trailer. So if you're worried about spoilers, I think you're okay to watch this. But yeah, it's piqued my interest, and I think this could be a good direction for the franchise to go.
Yeah, I'm excited about this. I know it's not going to be cinematically released, which is a little bit disappointing. At some point, no doubt, it will be a pick of the streams on the show, because this is going to be going on Star, I think, here in the UK, Hulu, I think, elsewhere. I'm intrigued, but like you, I think the series needs to do something. It's a bit like the Terminator franchise, where they try to replicate what has been done before, and that's what they think fans want. I think you need to do something. It's like an adaptation of a book. You don't want to cling to the source material like a wet blanket. You want to try and do something and kind of go in a direction that fans maybe aren't prepared. Okay, maybe we don't want to talk about The Last Jedi at this point, which is still, for me, the best installment in the new Star Wars trilogies. And talking of that, I know they've kind of talked a little bit about it doesn't look like we're going to get any new installments within the series on the big screen. They're going to stick to the small screen. But if we can kind of go into kind of geekier areas, like I know we've had the news that John Krasinski, I didn't know if this was known, but John Krasinski is going to be directing a Fantastic Four movie. We know that since Disney bought Fox, they now have access to the X-Men, the Fantastic Four stuff. I think I'm rather excited by this because John Krasinski, to my knowledge, has only directed 2 films. You can correct me, Hamish, if I'm wrong, but those 2 films that he's directed, I have liked both of them. So I'm very much looking forward to this installment, but I am also aware it's going to be an MCU movie. It's going to be in all the confines of that. I'm the person that years ago said he was suffering from comic book movie fatigue, but I don't know. Could you be interested in this?
Yeah, I think it's actually exactly what the MCU needs at the minute, because like you, I'm definitely suffering from a bit of that fatigue, and I think what it needs is either a big X-Men movie or a big Fantastic Four movie. So if this is the case with Fantastic Four and with this director, who did great things with A Quiet Place, it was my favourite film of that year that came out, and he's clearly got an eye for direction. He can do atmosphere, he can do action. So I think it's a really good pick, and I am intrigued, and I think it's going to do well because these are characters that are well known. We're sort of getting to that stage in the MCU where we're getting a lot of characters from the comics that only people really into the comics know about, and that is great as well. But I think to get that sort of excitement that they had with like the likes of the Avengers, I think something like Fantastic Four is a really good direction for them to go in, and I think it's a great pick for a director.
Yeah, I'm tired of going to Aaron Flanagan from the comic book guys and saying, so who are these characters? Why do I need to be excited about them? I know the Fantastic Four, I've heard of them, I've seen the previous movies. I quite like the previous movies. Okay, not the Josh Trank one. We don't talk about that. But yeah, I mean, if anyone's going to get me excited about an installment in the MCU, it's going to be Gorgeous John. So the less said about that, the better. I think with that we shall move on, but I still think kind of superhero-y kind of themes. I will come back to this at some point, but let's move on to this week's big release.
It didn't work.
She's not a robot, Annie. She's a little girl with little girl emotions, which are wildly unpredictable.
Charlie?
She just has to shove it down and keep it hidden.
Our responsibility is getting her ready.
Our responsibility is to protect her.
Charlie?
If they catch her, they're gonna put her in a cage.
Charlie?
They're gonna run tests on her for the rest of her life. We'll never see her again.
If who catches me?
Something's happened. I need it handled with discretion. And I need her back alive.
So that's a look at Firestarter, Twisted Firestarter. It's out in cinemas now. Hamish, do you want to very briefly set the scene for this? I think if anyone's seen the likes of Stranger Things, anything like that, you're going to be very familiar with this plot. But do you want to set it up?
Yeah, so this is an adaptation of Stephen King novel. It's also a remake of the 1984 film, and it follows this young family who all have special abilities, sort of superhero abilities, but they're on the run from a government organisation who have previously experimented upon them.
Yeah, perfectly done. So we've both seen this. What did you think?
Well, I have to be honest and say a lot of this film is painfully average. I think as well, when you consider other Stephen King adaptations, other Blumhouse films, you have the likes of The Invisible Man, Get Out, Happy Death Day. They've been releasing a lot of interesting, innovative, memorable films in recent years, and this isn't one of them, unfortunately. But saying that, whilst it is quite average, I still did find parts to enjoy to it, and I thought there was a certain charm to it. I think the best feature of the film is Zac Efron, and I think he's an actor that gets unfairly dismissed, possibly because of past roles, but I think he proves here how capable he is as an actor, and it's interesting to see him he plays the father in this film, and you're so used to him being sort of the teen high school student, so it's a bit of a shift for him, and I thought he did really well. But apart from that, there's not a lot going on. The only other thing I would say is that the score is really good. I really like the score, and that's obviously down to John Carpenter amongst there's a few other people involved, but I think his score does really well to heighten the atmosphere and give it that sort of like an 80s feel to it. And I think whilst it is average in terms of today's film, it felt like I was watching a movie that was made in the 80s, and I mean that in a good way. So we're not going to be talking about it in 10 years, but I think if you go in with reserved expectations, I think you'll have a fine time with it, but just don't go in expecting the next Get Out.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think it's a perfectly fine cinematic meh. That's the best way of putting it. It's 3 stars, that's still a recommendation. I have seen better horror movies this year. I have seen worse horror movies this year. I think it's just perfectly fine. I don't really get the need to remake it. I guess it's because of Stephen King. There's that lore there. We have the director who worked on The Vigil, which was a horror film I quite liked. It wasn't perfect, but it had some interesting moments. Like you, I quite liked the John Carpenter score, but then I'm a man who's nearly 40 who grew up loving John Carpenter, so that was always going to be a box tick for me. The most terrifying thing I will say about this is that Zac Efron is now old enough to play the dad role. I still think of him in those teen roles that you mentioned. I think he's perfectly fine in the role. There's no stick I can really hit it with in terms of being a bad movie. There's solid performances all around. I think it lacks atmosphere. And I think, and it'll be interesting to see what you think, because the obvious comparison, as I've mentioned, there's stuff like Stranger Things is out now. And those all heavily riff on those early Stephen King movies and the source material. And when I remember watching the original Stranger Things going, this is just riffing on the 80s Firestarter. I mean, that's Drew Barrymore. I've a soft spot for it. I don't love it. But I think my main criticism of the original and this, and even the source material, was because it's not dealing with it's not really trying to deal with a girl going through the challenges of adolescence and puberty, say in comparison to something like Carrie. There's no subtext to it. So when there's no subtext, it's, for me, I know I'm saying I'm not criticising, but it's as dull as dishwater. In that sense, there's nothing there, there's no meat on the bone. If you look at, say, what Brian De Palma did with the original, even the remake of Carrie, it's not perfect, but at least there's that subtext of puberty that adds a level of depth to the source material that's just not here. I don't know if that's, for me, this is pretty much just a horror movie with a bit of kind of X-Men-y vibe. That's why I was saying earlier on, we were talking about the X-Men. That's all you've kind of got here. I mean, is that something you noticed or thought of?
Yeah, and I think that's why I'd say it's just average across the board. Like you say, there's nothing particularly wrong with it, but there's not a lot right with it either. And I liked in a way that I didn't feel like it was riffing on the old 80s movie. I thought this was actually one of the closest things I felt like I could be watching an 80s movie. Like, I think a lot of the more modern stuff, Stranger Things, they really go in on the editing and the poppiness of it and everything, whereas this generally did feel a bit more grounded in that way. So I appreciated that about it. But it's like you say, without that subtext, it's very flat, and especially when we're spoilt for choice these days in terms of the superhero genre. And whilst that they have their own issues, but there's usually something else going on in that. But with this, there's just nothing there. And I saw a comment, someone suggested this would work better as a mini-series, and if we'd actually got to see the relationship, the father and daughter relationship, a bit more developed, then there would be something there to engage with. We don't have that here, unfortunately. It's very surface level throughout the whole film. So I think that's the main problem with it, and because of that, that's why it won't be memorable.
Yeah, I think with that we shall move on and go into this week's Pick of the Streams.
We know very little about his past. James Bond doesn't really like to look back.
The Bond motto, which was "the world is not enough," which could have been written especially for him.
People like to read about heroes.
In the face of overwhelming odds, he finds a way.
Bond.
James Bond.
One man against the whole police force or an army.
It was an autobiography of a dream.
Cubby and Harry formed a company called Eon, Everything or Nothing.
The question from the distributor is who was going to play in it?
When women were shown the screen test, they all reacted.
The style of it really took me in hand and knocked me into shape.
I wanted to be James Bond, but you couldn't live the way James Bond lived.
I stopped breathing at that point.
It was an ongoing battle.
A whole nother slew of legal problems.
Roger was brilliant at what he did, but I couldn't simply copy what he'd done.
Double O's have a very short life expectancy.
A small group of men who have played Bond. More men have walked on the moon.
Yes, Money Penny, that's Everything or Nothing, and this is my terrible Sean Connery impression. So, Hamish, this is the documentary. It was released to celebrate the 50th anniversary of 007. It's on Prime, and I thought because now all the Bond movies, apart from the unofficial ones, we can maybe come into that at some point in this review, are now available on Prime for a limited time. And rather than trying to get through them all, I think this is a nice gateway drug into looking at the history of 007. So I don't think we've ever really touched on this in the times you've been on the show before. Are you a big 007 fan? Are you a big fan of Bond?
I would credit Bond as the reason why I love movies.
Okay, right.
It was the first sort of character I saw on screen that I really thought, okay, I'm intrigued here. And I think I caught Live and Let Die was the first Bond film I saw, and that's obviously the first Roger Moore, and it was the first of the Roger Moore season that was on TV. Watched all of them, and then it just spiraled from there, and still love James Bond today.
Okay, so that means I would probably suspect that this type of documentary would be right up your street. So had you seen this before we asked you to review it?
I actually hadn't seen this yet, and I'm not really sure why, but it was really good to watch it, and like you say, it feels like a good time to watch it with all the films on Prime, and also released back into the cinemas at the minute. A lot of cinemas have them on leading up to the 60th anniversary, so it was really good to watch this, and I was really impressed. It's a very methodical look at James Bond, the writing of the novels by Ian Fleming, and then the eventual production of the films. But what struck me most about it was that obviously it's an Eon produced film, so it could have been very sort of one-sided and very could have ignored the more difficult parts over the years that the franchise has experienced, but it's very forthcoming with the likes of the rights to Thunderball, which were debated, and there was lawsuits about those. We looks into the feuds between the actors and producers, and they admit when they weren't sure what direction Bond should go. So it's not necessarily a film by film, this is what happens in each movie. It's more of an overall look, but it still goes through it very detailed and in quite a succinct runtime as well, which I was impressed by. But there's a lot of humour in it too, which I liked, especially I think Pierce Brosnan is brilliant in this when he's sort of talking about his time and how they really pushed the limits with his movies, particularly Die Another Day, and I think his discussion about that's actually better than the film itself. So it has a bit of everything. You get the sort of behind the scenes trivia, you've got a lot of interesting people integral to the series talking about it, and then there's that humour as well. So I think all in all, if you're a Bond fan, it's a must-see.
I remember watching this around the time of the 50th anniversary when Skyfall was being released, and it grabbed my attention then. And as you say, it's not just surface, it's not shallow, it does go into a little bit of depth, it does kind of explore and give us a bit of insight into the likes of someone like Cubby Broccoli and kind of that personal connection he has and how this was really a labour of love for him. As you've mentioned, it goes into the fallout with Sean Connery. We have George Lazenby coming in, who's an over-criticised Bond, in my opinion. It, as they say in the documentary, On Her Majesty's Secret Service is the best book. It's probably the only Bond book I've ever read, if I'm honest. I've got a few of them. I've maybe leaf-read a few, but On Her Majesty's Secret Service is the one I love the most. I think the film does... It's now being looked at now much more positively than it was at the time. But as you say, there's a lot there, and it goes a long way of being more than just a glorified DVD extra. And just the last thing I want to say, because they use quite a bit of the score throughout the documentary, just how great the scores have been for so many of the 007 films. You know, last question before we move on, Hamish, make me feel old. I know you've mentioned Roger Moore and watching Bond. That was the first time I'm imagining on screen, unless you do not age, my friend. I don't know, I definitely don't think you're of that age. My first trip to see Bond would have probably been Pierce Brosnan with GoldenEye. What was your first for the big screen?
Casino Royale, Daniel Craig.
That's okay, the less said about that, the better. Look, anyway, with that, we shall move on and wrap up this week's show with our DVD of the week.
Sergeant Rodriguez was a legend. Family funeral Sunday outside of Nogales. They want his dog at the funeral. You do this, and you're back in the game. She won't work with anyone. One minute she's good, the next minute she's sending 3 guys to the ER.
What's up, dog?
And you're gonna go on a little road trip. Easy. Why y'all so scared of him? Smell it out, big time. What is your deal, man? Maybe just take the crazy down one notch. Hey! No! No! You're just a demon. You're just a demon. Whatever happened to you, dog? You used to be a legend. Hey! Oh, no! Hey, dog!
You're so good.
How'd you make her get out of your hand?
I just talked to her. See, she's just a noodle. She just is so good.
So that's a look at Dog. It's available on DVD now, but you can also pick this up on VOD platforms as well. Hamish, you know, there's not much really needs to be said. This is a road movie of sorts. 2 people that are slightly broken. One just happens to be a dog. So what did you think of this film?
Well, Dog is exactly what it says in the tin, or at least it gives you everything that you'd expect when you see the poster. It's Channing Tatum, a dog, on a road trip. And that's all it needs to be, because it's a simple story that brings these 2 characters together, like you say, and the film is at its best when they're just chilling out together. It really is. It's very heartwarming. Of course, all the people they meet on the way and the stops they make, they're all a bit naff, but their chemistry, believe it or not, it works enough that you sort of don't mind. You just enjoy their company on screen. And I think the key to this, other than having a really cute dog, is having Channing Tatum, because he's a real movie star. It's kind of like, he's similar in a way to Zac Efron, I think, and it always feels like he's just playing himself. I get a real, genuine quality from him when I see him on screen, and it never feels forced. It feels very authentic, and I think because of that, the relationship's believable, and it's just really lovely. That's sort of all I can say about it. It is a bit naff at times. It's a bit cheesy, but I think you'd be hard pushed not to enjoy this film.
Look, I'm going to say this, right? If you hold out your wrist, check if you've got a pulse. I know Mark Kermode has done this before. Check your pulse. I think you're going to like this film, right? Okay? That's me putting my cards right out there from the start. I didn't expect to like this film as much as I did, but I am a dog person. I have a soft spot. And this is the film that something like Marley and Me wishes it was. Because Marley and Me, as nice a dog film as it is, there is the stage where it comes to emotional pornography. And there was a whole worry throughout this film when it's like, is this the way this is going to go? It's okay, viewers. I'm going to spoil slightly, but it doesn't go down that way. It doesn't make you sit in your cinema seat or if you're watching at home and say, look, if you don't cry at this bit, you're a bad person. And because this film isn't trying to go to a galaxy far, far away, it's not trying to give us superheroes and people with telekinesis powers, all that kind of stuff. It's just about a road movie with a man and a dog. And probably the closest I've seen to that that I can think of in kind of recent months is something like Chappie on Apple Plus, another film I love. Okay, that had robots and a dog, but I love this. I genuinely love this. I watched this last night. I rented it online, sat down to watch it, and I did not expect. There is a point, which I know spoil some things, but I didn't expect. There's a sequence in it where I didn't expect to have as big an emotional response as what I did, and I find it utterly charming. And then looking into it when we were going to be reviewing it, this comes from a personal place for Channing Tatum. He's co-director on this, which brings us a nice segue to let me stop talking about dogs. But what did you think of it as, he's not the sole director here, but for a co-directorial debut, what did you think of this for Channing Tatum?
Yeah, I was impressed. I think as well, it's always a bit of a worry when it's a directorial debut and they're also starring, because that can sometimes be a vanity project. There can be sort of those things involved. But I think it didn't need to be overcomplicated. I think he realised what it was, what people would like, what people would warm to, and he gives the audience that. But it's also not just like spoon-fed to them. There is more to it, while still being simple. And I just think they've got the chemistry right, and I think when the chemistry's right, you can forgive a lot else. And there's nothing particularly remarkable about it. There's nothing, it doesn't break the mold, it doesn't reinvent the wheel. But like I said, it just doesn't need to. When you've got the core, the characters right and the energy right, I think it was a good way for him to make a segue into directing. And I think there's a confidence about it without being smug. Like, he just knows what's going to work, and it did.
Yeah, I totally agree. I thought it was a very efficient directorial debut. As a co-directorial debut, it felt at times like this could have been like a festival film, but it does more. It does play to a mainstream audience. I could see this having widespread appeal. My mum could like this. My lovely wife definitely liked it. Like me, I think she got more upset because I was getting upset, but then I cry at anything. Anybody knows me know I cry at the drop of a hat. So yeah, I mean, of the three films we've talked about, I'd say this has probably got the most widespread appeal, but then what's not to like about Bond? So I know we're going to be wrapping up and going to our film of the week, so I guess I might have just played my cards too early, but without that, let's move on and wrap up this week's show and pick our movies of the week. Okay, Hamish, so I think I might have played my cards too early, so I don't think anyone's going to be sitting on tenterhooks kind of wondering what film I'm going to pick. But of the three films we've discussed this week, what would be the one you would recommend our viewers seek out the most and give a go this weekend?
Well, for the sheer joy of Pierce Brosnan talking about kite surfing on a tsunami, it's got to be Everything or Nothing.
Okay, well, I can see the way you're going, and I think any other week, Everything or Nothing would probably be my film of the week. I'm going to go dog, just for the plain, simple truth. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was not what I expected when I saw the poster, not really what I expected when I saw the trailer. I didn't expect to be blubbing watching it. and not because I was being manipulated into Blood, but it was a genuinely earned cry. So thank you, Channing Tatum. And yeah, so it's a tie this week. We don't have an outright winner, so we'll have to wait to see next week what our movie of the week will be. But look, that is us out of time. So all that's left for me to do now, Hamish, is thank yourself. So thank you very much for coming on this week.
Cheers, Jim.
And thanks very much for watching at home. We'll be back next week, but for now, until then, goodbye.